Today, we have the honor of sitting down with Jillian Turecki. Jillian is one of the world's leading relationship experts. As the host of the popular podcast Jillian on Love and the author of It Begins With You, Jillian has a following of 2.5 million people on Instagram. In this episode, we dive deep into the complexities of relationships, leaving no stone unturned. We start by examining why so many relationships fail and uncover the root causes behind a staggering 50% divorce rate in modern society. We explore why the initial euphoria of a new relationship can be so misleading, dissecting the fine line between lust and love. From there, we turn inward, discussing how self-awareness can be a superpower and why confronting your past is essential for building healthy connections. But it's not all theory. We get practical too. We break down how to navigate breakups, thrive in a world dominated by dating apps, and establish healthy boundaries for defining relationships. This episode is truly a masterclass in understanding relationships, and we believe you'll enjoy listening it as much as we enjoyed creating it. So without further ado, Jillian Turecki. June 2nd, 2014. Yes. Tell me what happened that day.
So I woke up that morning. I was very, very early on in a pregnancy, very early, just a few weeks. And I woke up to bleeding. And this was not the first time that this has happened, so I knew what was happening. And my then husband and I were having a lot of difficulties during our short 2-year marriage. And this was the day before our 2-year anniversary. But it had been okay the last few months. You know, my mom was dying of cancer. And I said, I have to go to the gynecologist. Will you come with me? Knowing that he would say no, and he did. He said, I have to go to work. And then he went to work, and I went to the gynecologist. And I think that, it's weird when you're in a relationship that's just not working, you almost become numb to the parts. It's like it becomes your new normal. It's like, oh, yeah, he's not coming with me even though I asked him to. That's sort of what I expect, as opposed to, no, my expectation is that you're my partner, you're my husband, you support me in this, I need you. But you get so accustomed to not having the support that you need. And so I went and, that was that. And then I came home that afternoon, and at around, 4:30, 5 o'clock, it was sometime around that. And it was a beautiful day. And I was outside walking my dog, and he texted and said, I'm going to stay at my parents'. And I was like, oh God. And then I called him, and then we had a conversation. Maybe it lasted 15 minutes. It's hard, but it felt like it lasted a long time. And, just like we're on two different paths, like him going into like a breakup soliloquy and me being like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what the hell is going on? Like, you can't do this, like going into sheer panic. Panic because, you break up with someone, mind you, your wife, in that way. Clearly you're fleeing, right? And there's nothing more terrible that you can do to your partner who's done nothing, nothing tragic to you, than to flee like that. It's a terrible, terrible thing to do. And so I was I was freaking out. And then, here I am today. That started a very, little did I know that was like the day that my new life would emerge. That was it. That was like the moment.
I just can't imagine that moment, like the amount of factors that are going on, especially with your mother.
Yes.
Then you have this miscarriage. And so if I'm reading and I'm understanding this moment correctly, so your husband broke up with you or started initiating the divorce process over a text message?
Over a text message, yes. He said he wasn't coming home. He said he was staying at his parents'.
And then from that moment, he never ended up coming home?
Well, no. Then I think it was a week later.
Yeah.
He came back to our apartment and we had, what would be more of the traditional breakup conversation.
Yeah.
And then he had a lot of shame and guilt. So he, bought me a new computer, like did all these things out of guilt. And then it kind of felt like we were still sort of in each other's lives, because in a weird way we were very, very close. So this was just bizarre. But we never lived together again. We never shared a bed again after that. Yeah.
Do you, it's been said that, you remember your most like traumatic moments, like so vividly. Do you remember like the feeling like of that day, like in your body?
So I can go there if I focus on it. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. We can go anywhere in our history if we focus on it.
Yeah.
It's not a good idea to focus on it. You want to, I definitely, yes, I could conjure up those feelings right now. Does it mean that it still lives in my body? No, I don't believe that. Does it mean that I'm still traumatized by that day? No, I believe that I've really processed that day quite deeply. But I can focus on the events and I can focus very intently. And yes, I could feel it in my body again. Not the same way as I did then, but I could conjure it, but I just don't.
Yeah, I found in your book the insights and learnings that you had from that experience to be profound. I think you wrote something that a lot of people can relate to. You said, I had a blueprint of what I believed a relationship should be. Find the person who gives you butterflies, make sure they treat you well. And when you get married, you'll have a companion for life. And so just kind of backtracking a little bit, how did that like relationship begin with this blueprint that you had?
Yeah. So I always say that our relationship pre-marriage was about 90% good, like great, and 10% problematic. And then people say, well, no relationship is perfect. And that is true. No relationship is perfect. But the 10% that was problematic was incredibly profound, giant red flags. You can't ignore that. And so when we got married, it switched. The 10% became the 90%, and the 90% became the 10%.
Wow.
Yeah. So we got along. We were very compatible. People liked to be around us. Everything on the surface really matched. We had great chemistry. We had some intellectual chemistry. But there were just things that were so profound. And I didn't know that there were things that I had to really be conscious of and aware of in myself and in another and in my dynamic with another before I commit my life to someone. And we're not taught this in school. If we're lucky, we have parents or caregivers who give us some really great lessons, whether directly or indirectly. But we're not taught how to choose partners, or we're not taught what really goes into a long-term relationship, because how it's depicted in art and media and film and all of that and literature is the honeymoon.
Yeah.
And like all the rom-coms, it's like they get together after a lot of drama and then no one sees what happens after that. So we have very, very little example. We don't have many examples of what enduring love is depicted in film, or art, or the things that influence us.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that in your family of origin, then you don't really understand like what goes into it. You have some, you're like, we're supposed to communicate, like, be nice to each other, like that stuff, but not the other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I totally relate to that. I mean, even in just film, really, it's like most of the depictions of kind of like even the film I'm thinking of in the moment is like Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt. This is like 20 years old now, but just kind of this war of like throw each other, like just this deeply sexual, just crazy, I hate you, I love you type of relationship is like what's looked at as like just this highly erotic, stimulating experience. But there isn't really a lot of, like you said, enduring examples of what to look for. And so when that's all you see, it's just kind of like normalized. And so what were some of the kind of red flags that you had ignored? You mentioned that 10%. So within that 10% that became the 90%, what were like some of the red flags that you were ignoring?
Well, there's one story that I outline in the book that I think is a good story. There was, we were about 7 months into our relationship, and we moved very quickly. So it was like 7 months and we were just like enmeshed, this was like, this is my person. I'm going to marry this person. I can't live without this person kind of vibe. And we were living in Brooklyn, and we were going to this event, this kind of theatrical event called Sleep No More. I don't know if you know of it, but it was in downtown New York City. And it was like a date night. And we were going, and we were in a car service going there. This is like before Ubers really took over. And he was being very quiet and very sort of aloof and in his head. He was in his head. And that's like the kiss of death for a lot of people, especially women. It's very intense for women when our partners lose presence with us, and we don't know what's going on. I think it's intense for a lot of people, but it's particularly intense for women. It's particularly intense. I had a father who did that on the regular. So my unconscious found it very familiar, but I was very uncomfortable. And I had no idea, but I felt in my body that the problem was me. I felt that he was upset with me, because he was different with me. His body language was different. He wasn't attuned to me. He wasn't turning towards me. He didn't seem into me. And so I did that thing, what's wrong? And he did that thing that people shouldn't do, which is nothing. No, something's wrong. Or you can say, I'm in my head about work or whatever it is, but just the nothing. And it was very awkward. It was like I was in this car ride going to like this great event, and it was a date night, and I felt like my entire body be hijacked with this tension. I didn't know what the fuck was going on. And so we get to this event. And for people who are not familiar, so Sleep No More is a very bizarre thing. It's almost like performance art. And you go into this elevator, and they give you these masks, the masks that sort of look like the Scream mask.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so what they do is that they separate you from the person who you come with. And everyone is sort of anonymous with the mask. Of course, you can see people's bodies and what they're wearing, but everyone's sort of anonymous. And so you're meant to have this sort of, crazy, unique experience where you're on your own. And then typically what people do is that they find their people throughout it, because it can take a couple hours, and you're looking at all these different rooms with this different stories and these music, and it's actually quite incredible. So I was like, okay, guess I'm going to be like doing this alone. So I did my best to enjoy myself alone, but I felt very disconnected from my partner, and it felt really weird. And what happened was that there were few times where, even though we had the mask on, we saw each other, because you know what they're wearing, you know who they are. You see everyone from the neck down. Like, you're gonna recognize your spouse, your partner, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. And my expectation is we see each other, and it's like there should be an embrace. Like, oh my God, we found each other. Like, let's do this together. Instead, he pretended like he didn't see me.
Oh.
And to me, that's one of the biggest, most profound red flags. How could I marry someone who could do that? And I don't want to make it out like he's the villain, I'm the victim. There are things that I did in the marriage that, I didn't understand how he felt. I didn't think about his feelings. I thought more about my feelings. So I certainly was not perfect, but I never did that. And to me, that was the biggest red flag. That was a terrible way to treat someone that you say that you love.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the premise of your book is the exact opposite of, you're giving an example of it. The premise is like it begins with you, it starts with you. And so I just think that experience, especially, a lot of psychologists or therapists, like they range on techniques of how to communicate and when to communicate, all of that different stuff. But I think kind of stonewalling and like not even communicating and then going to that experience sounds like horrific. And I think about even my own relationship, just even having an ongoing dialogue of knowing, I'm in the head, but I'm in your head, I'm in my head about something, versus just never even getting that closure that like, is it me? Is it not me? Like what's going on? And some people seem to live in that state just permanently, which can feel probably so suffocating.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. Yeah. It's just, hey, I'm in my head. It's not you. Just having a rough day. This is what's going on. I'll talk about it with you tomorrow, but like all good.
Did you ever get closure on like that incident specifically?
No. So this was my thing was, so how I would handle that today would be very different to how I handled it back then. No, I just couldn't wait for it to blow over. And it just kind of blew over and I never brought it up again because my MO was better not speak the truth and rock the boat. Because my fear of abandonment, my fear of it not working out was so overpowering that I would prefer to abandon myself than to rock the boat with him.
Yeah, that just experience, I think, for a lot of people is so relatable. The idea of, I think people are just terrified of being alone.
And losing love.
Yeah, and losing love. So they accept kind of mistreatment. Most people are familiar. Most people have been, like, if whoever's listening to this right now, like 50% of people will get a divorce. People range on like the accuracy of that, but let's just say for 50% for the sake of this podcast. Why do you believe that to be the case? Why do you think 50% of marriages fail?
A few reasons. One is because people don't select well. They don't, they select based on chemistry and their blueprint of like someone gives me butterflies and, we get along and we are, partners for life, companions for life, as opposed to having the tough conversations about, what do we believe a life well lived is? What is our stance on children? What is our stance on money? What is our stance on spirituality? Like, what's our values? How do we want to, is divorce an option? And what are we going to do to fight for this relationship when we have a hard time? So people don't have those conversations. And then they are not able to assess if they're actually with the right person for them. There are other reasons why breakups happen, but this is a main one. And then also, because rarely will we end a relationship with someone because we don't love them anymore. We end them because we've entered a stage of learned helplessness where we don't see a way out. We become hopeless. We don't see a path forward. We wish we could carve a path forward, but we don't see the path forward. We don't know what to do. We feel so misunderstood. We feel unseen. We're exhausted with not getting along with each other anymore. And we don't know what to do. So people don't have the skills. The skills to make a relationship work over the long term.
Yeah.
And people get very selfish. They think about, because this is what happens. We fear the loss of love. So we become fixated on what we're not getting. And we don't think about what we're not giving. And we think that it's all our experience, and we forget that there's someone else having that experience too. And we get in our heads, speaking of getting in our heads, we create a lot of stories about the other person. We build up a lot of resentment. That resentment creates a lot of resistance. That resistance creates a tense physiology. And in that tense physiology, we're not attracted to each other anymore. So we don't have that passion anymore. So without the passion, and I'm not talking about the first 6 months passion, just the attraction, we lose the motivation to meet each other's needs. And that's all part of the learned helplessness. And then we think, there's no better way to move forward from this than to get a divorce.
Yeah, what I find to be so beautiful about your work is like you're giving people tools and the wisdom to like be able to identify these things, because it's not something that you learn in school. It's definitely not something that you're learning in TV and film. And then even getting the right perspective of yourself in a relationship. You wrote, the truth is, even if you end up with a partner you've always dreamed of, you're still going to have to face your demons. And so people kind of develop this, philosophy that like if they find the one or something like that, or the right person for them, like they might have demons, but like essentially all of life is going to be solved once that person comes along. What are your thoughts on that kind of mindset?
I mean, I think that's the mindset that all of us need to work very hard to just banish. I mean, we're heavily conditioned to believe that with the right person, all our problems are going to go away. And even more so today, we're putting so much stock on back in the day, so to speak, you get married because it made sense and because it's part of a community. And there's many cultures where there's arranged marriages. Here in our culture today, it's like, no, I want the soulmate. I want the confidant. I want the lover. I want the best friend. I want everything. And we put so much stock on one person. And we think if I meet this twin flame, if I meet this soulmate, I'm good. When, look, a relationship should not be all work, but it is work, but it shouldn't be all work, right? And that's the really tricky thing. But there's no one who exists to complete you. There is no one who is here to rescue you. Your stuff is still your stuff. And the more, because you said, why do people, what leads to all these divorces? Here's a third reason. Unconsciously, because I think intellectually we understand this, but we think that someone else is responsible for our happiness. And so I certainly wouldn't recommend anyone pursuing a relationship any further with someone with whom together there isn't more joy, right? Someone should definitely add value to your life. Someone should support you and hold your hand. I say that metaphorically and maybe even literally as you face and confront things, and you do that for each other. But no one can actually make you feel fulfilled. No partner can give your life meaning. They can add to it. Yeah. But our fulfillment is our responsibility.
Well, what I was really interested in asking you about this kind of dynamic is we've kind of had a shift as a society. And so maybe 20, 30 years ago, I mean, this idea of maybe like marriage being like a cornerstone versus capstone type of thing.
Yeah.
And especially we're in New York right now, in a city like this or LA or San Francisco, I feel like career has taken place of marriage as like the number one priority in my life. And so, there are a lot of people that have this philosophy of the one, but you see tons of clients. Are you also running up against people who are running into like a hopelessness that like finding someone that would actually be committed to them is even realistic given the way that our culture has swung on this issue? Is that something that you're seeing as well with this big shift?
Yeah. So let me share a couple of things that I'm seeing. Yeah. So a couple of trends. One is this hyper independence of you work on you, I work on me, and then we come together 50-50. No. Every relationship has a level of codependence to it. And, you want to gain some interdependence, but we are dependent beings. We are not designed to do it alone. We really are not. So we need love and we need people and we need each other and we need to rely on each other. So this hyper independence of like, we're not, if you're in a bad mood, that's got nothing to do with me. Like, no, you're in a relationship, your moods are going to affect each other. Sure, you want to, there's a fine line. You don't want to ignore your own needs and only focus on your partner's needs, because that really is sort of like classically defines like sort of codependent relationships, which is I need you to change so that I can feel comfortable. And I'm only going to focus on you and your dysfunction and changing you, and I'm going to completely ignore me. But, that's sort of an extreme case. But I am seeing people being this new thing of like, yeah, you work on yourself. No, you work on you learn how to grow together. And that's what's really important. Now, speaking to the whole, work first and whatnot, call me a romantic, call me crazy, but I think that as we age, what we come to realize is that nothing is more important than love and community. And, I'm a very driven person. I never thought I'd become an entrepreneur, but here I am. So like that's very important to me, and I never thought it would be. But I also know that it can be a very meaningless life without love. And this is what people in their older years figure out. This is what people, when they're dying, there's a lot of people know this, but, maybe not, but people don't really regret the things that they do when they're dying. They regret the things that they haven't done.
Yeah.
And the things that they often regret is, I wish I'd spend more time with the people I love than working. That's sort of always said. I wish I spent more time enjoying life rather than just striving and achieving. So, I would say that if work is really important to you, and I know that it also depends on a person's stage of life, and when a man is sort of like in a building stage, usually that's 20s and 30s and part of his 40s, you can really make space to prioritize love and community and all that, your life is going to be so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways, I don't know if you can't not afford to. I mean, I've, struggled with feelings of burnout as well, but
Yes.
building this media company and the sacrifice that's like required to do that. And just this constant tension of like, how much is too much, like where's the
Yes.
line? A lot of what you're talking about is also just science. One of the guests we had a few months ago on this podcast was Dr. Arthur Brooks. He wrote, he kind of teaches the science of happiness at Harvard, wrote a whole book on it. And he was just talking about how these 4 pillars of happiness and like how relationships are just integral to that. And having meaning in your life and getting meaning through your work is part of that equation as well. But I mean, exactly what you're saying is that like our relationships like are foremost at like the top of that list in terms
Yes.
of what actually leads to like a happy life. And then when you just like neglect that for like long periods of time, there probably can't be a worse feeling than, you're getting older and then you're like, I don't really have close. And I don't want to pedestal like romantic relationships.
It could be any
generally, but like
community.
family, friends, stuff like that, community. If you're like, well, I don't even have anybody close around me.
Yes.
It's a very like lonely and empty feeling. And
Yes.
so, yeah.
Very much so. So it's important to prioritize relationships. And if you want a romantic relationship and you're caught in the like, I don't know, I'm too busy, like how am I going to do it? Maybe you need to rethink that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because a good relationship, and no relationship is perfect, but a good relationship where you've selected well, where you're doing the work, you're showing up, you're both showing up for each other, will make your career better. It makes all of your life better. It gives you strength. It gives you strength.
Yeah.
Whereas the wrong relationship, everything falls apart.
I think people think they're on the right path, or they think they're on seeds of the right path because let's just say they haven't been in a relationship, or they haven't felt this kind of euphoric feeling, and then they meet somebody where it's like you get the early relationship, which you've talked about, chemistry and all this stuff.
Yeah.
That euphoria is just like everything's gonna be fixed, and so everyone in those beginning stages, and even for a while, might be on their best behavior, and you feel like you're on top of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like a drug. I mean, it is a drug
Completely.
but it's in the form of a person, so it's not like you're kind of blinded how that could actually be unhealthy. It's like, I'm not doing cocaine. I'm not like going out like binge drinking at night. Like, it's a person, and we make each other like feel really good.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel is like deceiving about putting so much stock into that stage and those feelings?
So when you meet someone and, well, there's two things. One is, we have a really fleeting experience here on earth. So part of me wants to say, enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy it. And they are only reminding you of something that is inside of you already. I really, truly, truly believe that. That they are awakening something inside of you that has been dormant, that you are love, that you are capable of this. Now, certainly without the other person and the lust, it's harder to find, but it's really just a sense of aliveness. When we meet someone new, it's like that novelty and, that promise of what this could be. And it awakens in us our creativity. It awakens in us our eroticism. It awakens in us our joy. And so I think the interesting question that we can ask ourselves is, in what way am I sleepwalking in life that it makes it such that when I meet someone who awakens this in me, I then never want to let this person go, and I want to cling, and I don't want it to change, and I don't want them to change. That's the addiction. We become attached to that feeling. And though I'm not going to BS anyone and say, you can find this on your own, but some people can. Some people can through meditation. Some people can through psychedelics. Listen, you could have an amazing night out, whatever the thing that you love to do. Maybe you love to dance. Maybe you go to your favorite concert and you dance to your absolute favorite music. What is awakened inside of you during those couple of hours is a pretty close second, if not in some ways as good as what is awakened in you when you meet someone who you were attracted to and you're into, and maybe it's been a long time since you felt that feeling of falling in love. So it is, we can access it.
Yeah.
But most of us, and I'm to blame here too, like can walk through life not really letting ourselves feel that. And
yeah, you described it as like feeling alive.
Feeling alive.
Yeah.
Feeling alive. And there's a lot of different ways, healthy ways to feel alive. And so I would say, I don't want to poo-poo that feeling, like enjoy it. Like life is short, enjoy it. But understand that this is what it is and that it's rarely really about the other person. There's so much more you need to uncover about that person before you make them the authority on your internal experience.
Yeah, you make this key distinction between lust and love, which I thought was important. And so we often think in the beginning of a relationship, we're in love. And so it could be the seeds of that, for sure. But many times, like, we're in lust. And so I think what's really interesting is that in the beginning of a relationship, we love the way that the other person is making us feel.
Yes.
And so a lot of times I'd imagine what happens, and you could tell me if this is what you see in your practice, is that when that feeling becomes less intense and it dims, then all of a sudden, like, we're not on our best behavior anymore. And so it's like, we're not getting our fix of a drug. And so you summed it up perfectly. You said, you have this quote, mature love says, I see all of you and I accept all of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that person isn't giving you like an euphoric feeling and they're just kind of like laid bare before you and you're laid bare before them, and you kind of have this, I guess, relationship of self-sacrificial love, meaning like you're not putting their needs before your own and in a healthy way, but there's like a mutuality that's happening where we're both looking out for each other's needs.
Yes.
And we could just be like fully ourselves. And so that I just felt was such an amazing description of just love in general. So like, do you have any insights on that in general?
Yeah. So, you described it really well. And I will add to that. So we think, as we sort of transition, a lot of people have difficulty transitioning from the honeymoon phase into the more committed stage of a relationship. A few things are happening there. Because we get more comfortable. And then we think, oh, wait a second, you're not perfect? Oh, wait a second, you actually are flawed? Oh, wait a second, I'm a little annoyed. Or wait a second, I don't feel as euphoric around you as I did like last month. And we think, maybe something's wrong with them, or maybe something's wrong with the connection. Instead of the fog is being lifted, the drug is, leaving your body. And now what you're stuck with is you are flawed, they are flawed. They are not some parental figure who's coming into your life to make up for all the things that your parent didn't give you. And now you got to like really see if the two of you have something more that you can build off of. So that's one thing that I will say. Another thing that I will say, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this, your insight on this. Certainly lots of bad habits that women will have in a relationship, but one of the habits that I want men to really pay attention to, particularly in the beginning stages, like the first 6 months of a relationship, is men will tend to pursue hard. And I think that there's an unconscious, I think they like the hunt.
That's probably true.
Yeah, they like the challenge. Of course, this is not all men, but we can generalize here. They
like a conquering thing.
Yeah, the conquer and the challenge. It's like men really, the masculine, which resides in men and women, but the masculine in all of us sees a challenge and really likes it. And so once you get the person, let's just say it's a woman, then what happens is that men tend to then relax. Oh, I can relax. It's not like, oh, now I don't. Yes, there will be some who will say, now I don't even want her, but then something's wrong with him. Something's wrong with you. You need to go to a therapist and figure that out, that you don't want someone once you have them. But you tend to relax. And so for the woman in particular who's loving the attention, because we love that, and we love the pursuing, we love to feel cherished, we're like, what's happening? And then what women do is then they freak out and they forget, oh, I have a life and I don't need this constant attention from this person. Yeah. So it's both people who actually need to kind of be aware of that. It's like, you know what? Yes, you can relax, but you still really, if you want to be seen as really like super attractive to your partner, like keep pursuing them. Like especially if that was your dynamic in the beginning, like, no, it doesn't have to be obviously the same in the beginning, but still do it a little bit because they're actually not yours, believe it or not. They can leave you at any time.
Yeah, it's true.
And then for women, I would say, remember, like this is not the only thing that matters. You've got a whole other life and you need to really put some energy into that and not worry so much about if he's constantly all over you and pursuing you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good diagnosis of the situation. I think that, there's this conquering thing that goes on with men in particular. And then it's almost like a boredom or something that happens, like, oh, now I finally have it. Now I like achieved the goal. And it's like, we're not fixating on the right things. Like to go back to what you said earlier about like, shared values. And then
how can I make this person happier? Yeah. How can I love them more? What's interesting about them? How can I light them up?
Yeah. I think also like in the beginning stages of a relationship, like, again, it could be you could be at the seeds of love, but if you can't really see and accept all of someone if you don't really know them in an early stage of a relationship. And that only comes with like endurance and years and stuff like that. And then when you get married and stuff like that, you're exposed to all these different streams of like stress. Someone gets sick, you have a miscarriage, like all these different circumstances that you're hit with, and then who people are become accentuated, and so all their trauma, their hurts or whatever, like come out.
Yes.
And so it's like we don't focus on that at all in the beginning. We just focus on the feeling, and then this chemistry that's like going on, however you want to define that, which again, like you said, I don't think we want to paint a thing like that's bad. Like life is short. Like it's
and it's fun.
It's
part
fun.
Of life.
It's a fun. So what do you feel like a healthy level of chemistry is in the early stages, but not something that's like getting completely out of like control?
Okay. So what's out of control for the majority of people is you meet someone and you're like, oh my God, this person looks, smells, is everything that I've ever wanted. I don't feel good enough for them. I can't stop thinking about them. You know, maybe they remind me of like that movie star that I was in love with when I was like 5 years old or whatever it is. And you're just like this person and you're like this. Yeah, run. Because what you're doing, because you immediately, what's happening is that you don't feel good enough for that person. And you are pedestaling them and you are projecting your childhood fantasy onto them.
And there's like an anxiety.
And there's an anxiety and you're not going to be your true self and you're not interested in even seeing who they are because God forbid the image of what you projected onto them. Because what happens to the person on the pedestal? They become the fallen hero, inevitably, always. And so it's great when you're actually in love, when two people are in love and they put each other on pedestals, like for good reason. That's a different thing. So I would say that that's usually a kind of chemistry where people I'm going to do whatever it frickin' takes to get this person. I don't care what red flag they present to me. I don't care what I have to do, who I have to become. People do this. I've done it.
Yeah.
Years ago. I've done it. And so that's unhealthy. That's going to lead to that's going to go down a very bad path. What you want to do is process your enthusiasm. Like, I'm excited about this person. They're beautiful. I feel great around them. And I know I've been around the block a couple times. Like, I know it takes time to really get to know someone. I know what it is that I want. And I am committed to not straying from what it is that I know that I need on a deeply, deeply, deeply soulful level in order for me to function inside of a relationship. And that takes some discipline. It takes a strong value system and it takes maturity.
What about the man who like is in the conquering mode? Like, what would you say about
same thing, same advice, exact same advice.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one idea that I wanted to get to that I thought was amazing. We kind of live in this paradox kind of where we value authenticity as individuals, but when we're like caught up in this stage that we're talking about, we kind of like pretend to be somebody else in the beginning parts of relationships. And we don't let on who we really are. And then kind of like when who we really are comes out, like the relationship kind of goes to shit. And so why do you feel like we're at such war with that concept itself? It's like, oh, I want to be authentic. I love authentic people. But then we don't actually like live that out ourselves and then compromise.
Yeah, because, well, in the very early stages, here's the thing. There is a dance to dating. There's a dance to seduction. There's a dance to attraction. And, it's wise not to put all your cards out on the table right away. Like, you want to keep a little mystery. So it's a very fine line of playing this dance where really is only, in my book, healthy and fun when both people are participating. And you're just doing it a little bit. And then as you get to know each other, you open up a little bit more about who you are and what your vulnerabilities are and the things that you kind of deal with. The more that we don't like ourselves, the more that we are under the influence of the conditioning that says you need to be a certain way in order to get this person, the thicker our mask will be. We all have, let's just say we all come to the table as sort of like, the greatest representation of ourselves, right? In the beginning. I think that, it all boils down to, we're so afraid of not belonging. We're so afraid of not being enough. And sometimes it's just very easy to get accustomed to the mask and to do the things that we've always done. And if this person sees me, will they still love me? If this person truly knows who I am, will I be enough for them? And am I answering your question?
Yeah,
I hope
for
I
sure.
am. Yeah.
I mean, the word that's coming to mind, I think, is settling, and that settling is a product of a lack of authenticity in some instances. And so that's a big question. Like, why do you feel like we settle in relationships?
There's a few reasons. We settle because people settle because they're afraid to be alone. People settle because they value connection and love at such a high level that even if they discover that they're really with the wrong person, they would rather keep the connection than face losing the connection. People settle because they believe they can't do any better. People settle because, they've been told, well, you can't have everything, and you can't. But they haven't figured out, well, these are the 3 things that I must absolutely have, and the other things I can be flexible about. People settle because they don't believe that they're deserving. They don't believe that they're worthy of having the kind of love that they want. And that's why people settle. And then the flip side of that is the people with the expectations that their partner should be sort of this angelic, non-human human who has transcended all their problems and has come into your life to kind of hold your hand through life.
Yeah. Many of those reasons, like, it seems just stem back to this idea of like not being able to love ourselves.
Yeah. Or not feeling enough. Exactly.
Yeah.
Not feeling good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at some level, like, if you're going to, apply a lot of the principles that we talked about and that you talk about in your book, doesn't there need to be an acceptance that happens? This is a really hard acceptance, but like whether you're 25, 35, 45, whatever, don't you need to accept that, like, oh, I could be alone. Like, I could be alone and I might not meet someone. And I just might be single. I might not find a relationship for me. And like, getting to a place of like, I'm okay with that. Like, and living this tension of like, I might have a dream to be married or be in a relationship, have children, all this stuff. And like holding the intention of like having that dream. But not being willing to compromise and like settle for something that's like not going to be good for me or is going to end up in divorce and something else because the person who might be a good fit for me hasn't come along yet. But you're living in that uncertainty. Like, I don't know if they're going to come on. I have to have like faith that's going to actually happen, but
there's no guarantee, but one can be more proactive about meeting someone. One can be more flexible in terms of what it is that they can live with in a person. I don't want people to settle, but you also have to define what is settling. If for you, maybe you're in your 60s or your 70s and you just want to meet someone who's really nice and you can have a good laugh with. Is that settling? I don't know. I don't see it as settling. So it's also redefining as through the stages of your life, what it is that you actually need and what would actually be nice for you. And then it's also, you have to watch the story that you tell yourself. I'm never going to meet anyone, especially people who are younger, like, I'm never going to meet anyone. Maybe it's going to take longer than you think. There's no guarantee. Being a good person doesn't guarantee the relationships that you want. It's not luck. It's really just based on the choices that we make. And, like I said, you could be in the latter stages of your life and say, this is a good person and I want the companionship. So it's not settling. This is lovely. I'm not going to die alone. We're good friends. But yeah, I would say to people who are really afraid that they're going to be alone, of course, you can't guarantee it. But more times than not, in my experience in working with people, what is really underneath it all is a whole story, a self-pity story. I'm never going to meet this person. I'm doing this. And it's not just about love. It's like, it's pervasive. You see it in their work life. You see it in all different areas of their life.
Yeah.
And so once they change their thinking, then it might be much more probable and likely that they'll meet someone, but you have to have realistic expectations.
Yeah. I mean, I would define settling as settling for like mistreatment. Number one, like mistreatment of, and then the other thing is settling as well in terms of maybe there's like superficial factors that we're looking for in a person who then indirectly that person ends up being like not good for us either. Right. And so it's a continual choice of settling for people that, and I think you've talked about this in your book, a bunch of just a pattern of like dating people that are like not good for us. And like we're settling in that regard or mistreatment, because in other aspects, I feel like we then overlook other people because we're so fixated on that stuff. And there was like a story in your book that was so interesting where that's hitting a couple of these different points. There was a client you had who you told not to wear makeup when she went to Whole Foods. And so I think that was like about authenticity, but then she ended up developing some sort of anxieties about this relationship later on. So, I mean, it touched on these points. Can you share about that story?
Yeah. And then I want to talk about settling out. I want to share something about settling too, because there's other ways we can settle. Yeah. So she was like a very beautiful woman, but her mom was like a movie star, and her mom kind of like basically made it so that like you had to, always put on a face and always is how you look. So she would like to go grocery shopping at Whole Foods. She would like wear stilettos, like a full face of makeup, like hair done, because she wouldn't bear to be seen not without that. And I told her we need to stop that. We need to slowly stop that. You need to, that's not actually it's getting you the wrong attention. A man who really wants to be with you wants to see how you smile. It's all about your energy. He doesn't want to see a bunch of makeup all over your face. It's not about the stilettos. It's not about that. I mean, am I wrong?
No.
It's not about that. Yeah. So then I slowly, she was, because inside of her, she's like, I'm really like a jeans and t-shirts and like t-shirt and sneakers kind of gal. Like I like to get dressed up once in a while, but I'm really most comfortable like in jeans and t-shirts and sneakers. That's who I feel like I am. And I said, well, that's who has to go to Whole Foods, because that's what you have to present to whoever guy, whatever is going to come up to you. That's what he has to see. But so she did do that, and she did meet someone, and they would have FaceTimes, and she's like, oh my God, I had like my hair in a bun, my glasses, I even had some pimple medicine on, and like it didn't even matter. So that was great. But yes, so that was wonderful. And she met someone wonderful for her. But the stuff still came up in their relationships, the part of her that wanted to sabotage. Because her thing was, if I'm not like this, then I'm not good enough. So she was able to strip away all the makeup and all that stuff and be her true self. But then as soon as we were in a relationship, all that other stuff started to come up, which, we're getting too close, let me sabotage it. Because her pattern was always chasing men, always being with unavailable men, never feeling good enough. And the story just kept on reinforcing itself. So every time she would get heartbroken, she'd see, I'm not good enough, or I'm not pretty enough.
Which I think some of it was, what I thought was profound is I think some of those men, like there are men who they're after status and power. And so And so in presenting herself in a certain way and trying to fit into a certain image, like there are just so many men who are like intent, and it's not even a really,
They want that on their arm.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not even really about, it might be about sex potentially, but really it's about like the social cachet of like, oh, I have a really hot woman with me. And like, then the compliments from other men.
Yes,
and
all the validation.
Yeah, getting pat on the back. And then, oh my God, you're with this hot woman, whatever.
Yes.
And so, I mean, that's just a terrible starting place for a relationship.
Well, it's insecure person attracting insecure persons, two insecure people needing constant validation from things and people outside of themselves. And guess what? We tend to find each other. So those people tend to find each other.
Yeah. And then she gets into this relationship
with a very authentic person. But it's like, okay, well now the real work of loving comes in. And so it's like, oh, he's doing this, I don't know. And like all these things, trying all these tricky little ways to sabotage it, to not get too close. And really what I had to do was just point it out to her because she didn't even realize it. She didn't even realize. We don't, because people don't realize it.
Yeah.
And so kind of letting down her guard even more, the layers even more, to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to meet someone else's needs, to actually do the dance that is a relationship, because she's never really done it before.
Yeah. And so did they eventually got married, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's an incredible story of somebody enduring. And then you wanted to close the loop on the settling thing.
Yeah. What I was going to say was that sometimes we settle for, and it's not that we're being mistreated, but we're just with the person who wants completely different things out of life. And that by being together and by being with them, we're not actually able to live the life that we know intuitively we have to live. And that would be settling too.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think part of this process of stepping into healthy relationships and the idea that like it begins with you, I think understanding the human condition. And so there's so many religions and philosophies that have tried to diagnose the human condition for like a really long time. And I thought the concept that you tried to get at, I was reminded of this with the higher self versus lower self type of concept. I remember a long time ago, I don't know, I read this line from like a famous pastor or something who said in the context of a relationship, I think you must acknowledge that you're a sinner married to a sinner. And it was basically just getting this concept that you need to have an expectation when you go into a relationship, acknowledge that like we simultaneously have this tendency towards good and we simultaneously have this tendency towards bad. And sometimes we get in relationships and we think that someone's only going to act like saintly and good. And then when they kind of like fall short of that, things just go terribly and we set ourselves up for failure. And I also think it gives us, the higher self, lower self kind of thing, a dose of humility, because it's like we also have this side that comes out of ourselves, which you said is like sabotages like the entire relationship itself. And so can you talk to me a little bit about that concept? Because I think it's like really important for people to understand these kind of like two natures,
So as someone who has been practicing yoga for 26 years, and I taught it for almost 20 years. And, this idea of mindfulness and also meditation is very important to me. And I think very important to relationships. And really that is self-awareness. And it's an understanding of like, okay, we have stuff, we have baggage, we're not always our best selves. And so this idea of bringing mindfulness to a relationship is, what would my best self do in this moment? How would my best self communicate? How would my best self think about this situation? And we are going to sometimes, we have parts of ourselves that are afraid. The animalistic reptilian brain of ours, we get afraid, we go into fight or flight, we have certain traumas, certain histories, and we can do things that can really sabotage a relationship. We can be mean. And let's shelve, I think for a moment, for the sake of this conversation, abuse and like real mean. Yeah. But like, let's just say you're not an abusive person. We can still be a little bit mean. We can be cold. We can do all these things. And we actually learn to love ourselves, and our self-esteem will go up when we are more conscious, more mindful of when we are not being our best selves and really pulling ourselves out of that state so that we can bring more of our best selves to our relationship.
Yeah.
And that in many ways, in my definition, is really the work of a relationship. And the crankier you are, and the more things that you haven't dealt with within yourself, and the more you are, you have a habit of doing certain things that are not useful, the more you're going to have to really pay attention. And so that's really what I'm talking about, because look, you alluded to something earlier. It's like, okay, then, they're not the angel. They're not perfect. And so many times what I see in relationships is, we start to blame our partner for not being the perfect manifestation of our projection of them.
Yeah.
Right. And so mindfulness is okay. Is this me and my stuff and I'm projecting onto them? And how can am I actually being loving right now? Now, I know that can be a slippery slope if you have a history of being in abusive relationships, but really being able to build up your self-awareness muscle to be like, okay, this is me and my stuff versus like, this is actually an issue with them that I need to take up with them. Mm-hmm. And so the higher self is, we do have that choice. We have that choice. Every apology, every genuine apology where we were taking responsibility for something, mm-hmm. we are in that moment making a choice to behave more from our higher self and not from our primitive self, fear.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've just kind of like lost sight of this completely as like a society, which is why I thought it was such an important thing to talk about. I think Esther Perel talked about in her book of A State of Affairs, I think it was about the impossible expectations that we have on the other person. And so it's like they need to be everything and do everything. And on top of that, now it's like, okay, careers are like we're in this society to prioritize careers. Okay, they need to like come alongside that, behave perfectly and just come alongside me. And
be my business partner even.
Yeah, and it's like, we have this very high view of self, mm-hmm. and then this kind of like low view of like whenever they kind of mess up. And so this like inserts a dose of humility. And I think that like we're speaking to such a broad range of people. So like to your point, I don't want people to come in with the idea of someone that's been abused or something, like, because there are genuine things that we settle for with mistreatment, which we were just talking about.
And there's a lot of people out there who need to raise their standards. Yeah. Their standards are way too low for sure.
Yeah, but I do think that this is like such a kind of real diagnosis. So what would you say is that balance between accepting someone's flaws because we all have them, and then letting those flaws disrespect you, like even be abusive to you? Like, do you think like is there a line there? How do we determine like what we're accepting in relationships and what we're not?
This is the $1 million question.
Yeah,
it really is. Mm-hmm. So, well, first of all, you cannot tolerate physical abuse in any way, shape, or form. I've gotten messages from people like, he hit me once, but he's now in serious therapy. He says he will never do it again. He's doing the work. Do I stay? And I said, no, get the hell out. Because do you know how long it's going to take for him to get over whatever bullshit he's got to get over in order for him to not take a hand to the person he loves and hits him?
Yeah. It's like the begin. What was the movie? It ends with us.
It ends with us. Yeah. He's too far.
The summer,
yeah. He's too messed up. You got to get out. And because your life actually depends on it. It's too serious. You can't mess with that. Can't mess with that. And then one day he slips and then he breaks your nose or maybe gives you a concussion or kills you. So you can't. So it's useful for people to do two things. To say, what is the tolerable versus the intolerable? In what I'm going to accept in another and what I'm going to accept in myself in a relationship. And so it's a very important thing to figure out what's tolerable and what's intolerable. And it's also useful if you have a hard time making that distinction, because there's a lot of people who, for many reasons, one of the reasons is a naivete, cannot see the red flags, to maybe work with someone who can help you, who can be sort of like a grounded, objective sounding board. I think that it boils down to looking at your past relationships and being like, okay, I know this did not work. This felt terrible. This was awful. I know this was bad. I'm not going to tolerate that. I think that it goes also with, how does my nervous system feel? So maybe it's not just so much about the other person. Maybe it's the dynamic itself. And your nervous system is feeling chronically dysregulated in the relationship. It's like, okay, maybe it's not about leaving this person, but our relationship together is not what I want, because I don't want to feel this way. So something needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
So it really goes with the feeling, and it goes with getting a clear understanding about like what is intolerable. And there's the problem is there's nuance. You could say, well, if someone calls me an asshole or a bitch, they're out. Okay, fine. What happened before that? Does it matter that maybe you were calling them names? Does it matter that you were being really cruel to them? Does it matter that you were actually being bitchy? Like, so first you have to really understand the nuance of like, where am I in this?
Yeah.
You can say, I am absolutely not going to tolerate cheating. And I would say, great, I agree with that. Let's define what cheating is. Okay, they sleep with someone else. If they cheat, it's over. I am in full support of that. Just as long as you did not spend years ignoring them, belittling them, never telling them that you love them.
Yeah.
Right? So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, it really comes to just like, for both parties, like a radical commitment of just self-examination of your own actions. And then, you mentioned the apology thing before, but of just, the word coming to mind is just seeking forgiveness or whatever of like of actions or some sort of precedent of that, of humility and forgiveness, and like
we're going to hurt each other unconsciously.
Yeah. I mean, part of understanding what drives us and what moves us, obviously, is our past. And so I thought the way you talked about your relationship with your dad was like really important. So I wanted to touch on this.
Sure.
Because you talked about how your romantic relationships were profoundly affected by this. And you said at one point, relating to your dad, you said, my body was filled with dread and rag every time I thought of him, emailed him, or saw him. And so can you talk about what that relationship and what led to that point of even feeling that way?
Yeah. So they say that siblings don't necessarily have the same childhood, because you're born into two different physiologies. You have, depending on when you were born, your parents may be having one relationship with each other, and then maybe the other child is born and their relationship's a completely different relationship, even though that's the same relationship, if that makes sense. And we're different. And I was born into a family where my mom hated my father. Like they were not getting along. And my father had undiagnosed bipolar. My mom was depressed because she was with him. And I don't think I was a planned, intended pregnancy.
Yeah.
Then I was also born into a very sensitive nervous system. That's my constitution. So I'm very aware of things. I pick up on things. As a child, I didn't adhere to any circadian rhythm. And so my father had a very dark energy to him, in the true sense of the word, a very emotionally unavailable energy to him. He was born in Poland, raised mostly in South Africa, where he met my mom. They came to this country in 1968. And those years in Poland, it's almost, there's an Eastern European, and there's almost like a Germanic way about that. There isn't that generation. You're not men are not changing diapers. Plus you take into account culture. It's just different. So there's just sort of like a removal there. But, and he was a psychiatrist. And psychiatrists, when you're the child of a psychiatrist, a lot of people will relate to this. There's a lot of psychoanalyzing. And he was in his head a lot, and he was extremely intellectual. So he lived in his head. And his energy was scary to me. He never physically harmed me, but he was very passive aggressive, very manipulative. And, you know, there were eggshells all around him. And my sensitivity to that was just through the roof. So I just was very scared of him. I never wanted to be around him. And my mother, who would have loved to have thrown him under the bus with any opportunity she got, was certainly not a woman of denial. There was no physical abuse of any kind, but I felt allergic to him as if there were. And so, and then he wrote a book. And he wrote a book called The Difficult Child, and that was based on me, and I was called out in it. And he built his whole practice, became very well known in the field of psychiatry, and built it all around me because I guess I was just, cried for no apparent reason, just a lot of dysregulated nervous system. But also, what was not mentioned in the book was that I had two, very depressed parents, and I had one. My father was completely unpredictable and manic depressive, and would pill pop and drink to take care of it. And my mom was, the codependent. So, of course I was, a little difficult. And so, so I feel like my whole life in many ways was about learning how to break free from the chains that I felt around my whole body when it came to my relationship with my father. And so what I had decided to do when I was 21 years old was to ghost him, was to never return his call again. Because I was too afraid to say how I really felt. I was too afraid to call it like it is. All I knew was that when I was around him, I felt a tension that was unbearable. And so I just decided to not return his calls. I was in therapy at the time. I do not recommend this, but it was what I did I don't recommend just ghosting your parent, especially if they don't pose any physical threat to you. So I went many years, about 13 years not speaking to him. He tried. He could have tried harder, but he definitely tried. And then it was like, I started to recognize, oh, this isn't making the problem go away. Pretending like he doesn't exist, pretending like, I thought if I could just not speak to him, it's a non-issue. And that's just not how it works. In many ways, the monster gets bigger, inside of you. The fear gets bigger inside of you. And then when everything went down with my husband and then I was like 40 years old and like getting divorced, and, I had all that narrative, weighing on my shoulders. Like, how could this be? Like, how could I be going through this? And this is not, that really lovely feeling that we have when we're like, wow, life is not turning out the way that I wanted it to. And it's not good, And I recognized I have to deal with this. I have to deal with this. I do not want this story to control me anymore. I don't want, I have to decide what this story is. And I don't want to have daddy issues. Like, screw that. Like that. No. That's not going to be me anymore. So, I decided to heal it. And that was just letting him into my life, at arm's length, but letting him into my life and talking to him. And more than anything else, you see, I was living my adult life as though I was still the vulnerable child afraid of her father. And the biggest growth for me was to be able to say, you're not that child anymore. You don't have to be afraid. You can tell the truth. You could see him differently. you don't have to be afraid anymore. And so when we look at our current conditions through the filter of our past, that's when we really get ourselves into trouble. And we have to be able to investigate the story, acknowledge that we're different. I mean, this is a process, it's not an overnight thing. But I started to see him differently. You started to see him more for his humanity. And so no, I could never say that I ever really loved my father, but I went from hatred to some empathy. And in being able to do that, I could only do that when I had to see myself in the story as different. Then I could see him as different. And that's when healing takes place.
Were you ever able to, like when you started letting him back in, did you ever get closure from him on like the ways in which he mistreated you, or like how did that whole process unfold?
He had written emails to me over the last few years of his life, just apologizing and saying that he never should have mentioned my name in the book, because that was something that's just really hung. That's like, he called it the difficult child syndrome. That really defined my life in many ways, and it was exploitive to do that. He admitted to not being a good father. I mean, my father was a diagnosed narcissist. So yes, narcissists can sometimes apologize, believe it or not, with some age, So he was able, and he never was able to take responsibility, but he was. And so, but I never built up the courage to really have that conversation with him. I thought what was better for me, and maybe this was also me trying to like protect myself a little bit, but I thought what was better for me was to have just conversations with him about life and about certain things from his past, and to be able to see that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'm in the field of sort of psychology. He was a psychiatrist. He wrote a book. I'm writing a book. I saw this picture of him doing this yoga pose. I had no idea that he ever did any yoga, and it like looked exactly how I would do it. So there's certain things like that. And trying to, that's how, so yes, a little bit of closure with that, for sure. He took some responsibility for that, but it was never actually a sit down conversation.
It was crazy. You wrote this in like an almost entire chapter on this, and kind of it was just weeks before that he passed away.
Yeah, barely.
Was this like chapter kind of like therapy for you in a sense of writing it, or like how did you even process that?
No, it was very odd timing, and there was a part of me that kind of hoped that he would pass before the book came out. I just didn't want, I was like afraid for him to read some of the things that I wrote about how I felt about him, but I knew that I had to write it. He was sick. So, that was closure. That felt more like closure, being able to write this from a place of softness in my heart rather than hatred and defensiveness and anger and unprocessed pain and trauma. That felt like closure.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. About 2 months ago, we had a trauma expert on here, Frank Anderson, and
I know grief.
Yeah, and Frank also has been through trauma himself, and so he had this whole story with his father as well. Very kind of tumultuous relationship, and then he had this kind of whole story arc of like kind of closure and like moment with his father at end before he passed. And I think your story gives a different perspective into this spectrum of what is realistic, because like some people have this just beautiful like capsule moment with their parents, so full circle, and like everything just feels like totally healed. But then other people, that's a spectrum. They may never get that, like
Yeah.
in this life of this moment with their parents. And so I feel like the way in which you've processed that is like a really healthy thing, and leaning into it, because initially you were avoiding it. And so I
Yes.
think with people bringing that baggage into like relationships, and they're avoiding their past, and they're avoiding the things that lay in their past, and what's currently causing dysfunction in their relationship, I think your approach is a courageous one, but it's a healthy one to make, is to deal with those things and to face those things. So
You have to. You don't. Things don't go away just because you avoid them.
yeah, yeah. I thought we've covered such a wide range of things, and there was a couple things I wanted to land on, and so that get practical. One of them, is that relates to what we were just talking about, is like attachment has been like a huge topic for us as a company over the past few years. And obviously the relationship we have with our early attachment figures shapes our relationships with our adult romantic figures. And so what would you say about that in general, like about attachment and the role that plays in like relationship?
Yeah. Well, so my perspective sort of differs from a lot of people's perspective. I think it's an excellent tool, but there are people who say everything is attachment. I do not believe that. I think that there's more things at play. There's also people's experience in high school. There's also people's attachment styles can change. Who you're in a relationship with can also define, you can move in and out of avoidance and anxious attachment depending on who you're in a relationship with. If you're going to be with someone very avoidant, that can make you more anxious. Yeah. And the flip side is true. I think that there's also your belief system. How you believe, what you associate to love. What do you think about yourself? Your self-esteem. So all these things and attachment all play a role. Yeah. But I do not believe, and I have no problem going very strictly on the record on this, that it's just attachment.
Yeah, like a totalitarian approach to
because everything is like, well, I saw a meme recently on Instagram where someone's like, I have this crush. And then someone said, you don't have a crush, you have early attachment issues. I mean, it's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever. No, your crush is not necessarily because of attachment issues. Your crush is because you're a human being.
It's almost like demeaning what attachment actually is in a sense. Yeah,
exactly. And so there's lots of things. There's the belief system. There's a person's self-esteem. There is the dynamics, of course, of the family. There's what's happened to that person. Mm-hmm. There's lots of things that go into an attachment. Is a wonderful, wonderful source, but it's not everything.
Yeah. And then the other things are like very practical. So like, we've talked about a lot of the work that people like need to do. And then obviously they could dive into your book and learn more about that. But when it comes to navigating the dating landscape, the first thing, like dating apps, what's your opinion on them and just like potential upsides and downsides of using them?
So I believe that we should be doing more of getting out into the world and joining community and hanging out with groups and giving back to groups and having some fun and not being so alone on our phones and finding people through that. I think that it was better when people went to their local church or synagogue or mosque. And if you're not religious, then it's whatever, your community center. Like, get out there and do things. I'm not saying go off the apps. If you want to be on the apps, just don't make it the only thing, because you get burnout. There's an algorithm there. These people are strangers. It's not necessarily safe for women. There's definitely predators on there. And so we are losing a lot of our so we don't have a lot of our social finesse anymore. We have to get out there and and again, build community where you meet like-minded people, where you're actually having fun, where you're actually creating meaning in your life. You need some meaning in your life, and because if not, then you're going to make the relationship and this other person the only source of meaning in your life. And that's not a good idea. So I'm all for it. But the people who have been successful, clients of mine on dating apps, they actually had some boundaries around it. They would not, there's no texting back and forth. If the person didn't want to get on the phone or on a FaceTime, they just didn't, they were like, nope, you're gone. I'm going to unmatch you. A lot of people would expand their zip code. So instead of having to meet in their city, they'd be like, okay, maybe I'll drive an hour to meet this person. And they also didn't let themselves stay on it all night long. They had certain days that they would check and certain days that they would not check. And they put a very, very strict boundary around that.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting around the communication thing, because dating apps, I feel like dating apps have made it extremely, it's normalized this giving people this license to be rude or ghosting. And I feel like over the past 10 years, being ghosted on dating apps, or even like stories of people showing up on dates and then actually somebody not even showing up.
Yeah.
Like I've heard stories of like people stood outside and just looked at and then they just saw the person. And they're like, oh no, I don't like the way
God, nightmare.
And then they just leave. That's obviously something that we need to learn how to handle and handle that rejection, because people are just going to like behave that way. How would you advise people?
So a couple of things I want to say to that. Stop going on dates with lower your expectations. Don't go on. If you're like, okay, I want to let's say you're just trying to get your feet wet and you want a relationship, but you're like, okay, you're getting yourself out there. Maybe it's after a divorce or after a breakup, or maybe you've been single for a long time. Go on a lot of dates and see if you can make a connection with another human being without the expectation of there having to be a romantic connection, because you never know. Maybe that person's going to end up being your business partner, your best friend, the brother of the person that you're going to meet. You just never know. And a lot of people are very anxious on dates. And so it's better to practice going on dates with people who maybe you don't have a strong romantic connection with, so that you can practice being yourself.
Yeah.
So you can practice not having such a thick mask on, and you can practice breathing and really just having a conversation. Rejection. Look, no one likes rejection. But I was once speaking to this guy, good looking guy, but like, just a regular Joe. And I said, what do you think your superpower is? We were just having the conversation was relevant. What do you think your superpower is when it comes to like meeting women and whatnot? He said, I'm not afraid of rejection. If I go up to a girl and she's just not interested, no big deal. I was like, how did you learn it? He's like, I don't know. I just learned that like, you're just not for everyone. And that, and that's okay. And so no one likes rejection, but rejection is also a part of life. And you have to be look, anyone who's just going to like keep walking by you, they're not for you. They're not for you. And you have to be able to trust that, you know?
That's really good insight.
Yeah.
The last two things I feel like sort of adjacent to this. So, I mean, you've spent a lot of time talking about like situationships. And so it also feels like defining relationships, is harder than ever. So what would your ground rules be on the subject of defining the relationship?
Remember when I said I didn't want to rock the boat, right? So this is what a lot of people do. I see this more in women, but I also see this in men is, well, I want to be with this person. I don't want to rock the boat. I just, I'm not, talk about lowering of standards, like it's okay. I'll be with someone who's not going to commit to me, who doesn't want to have conversations about the future with me. And I'm going to tell myself a lie, because no one's going to lie to you more than you lie to yourself. I'm going to tell myself a lie that it's okay. It's good how it is, whatever, it's casual. But if I was really honest with myself, deep down, what I want is more, but I'm not going to say anything, because what if they don't want anything else, and tiptoe around. I am like on a mission to abolish that. Like, I don't want people to be getting themselves into that. I want people to, like, obviously in the beginning, it takes time, and you have to mitigate. If you're anxious, you have to really mitigate your anxiety and say, okay, you're wanting this person so badly. Why? You don't even know them. Like, you've known them 5 dates. Why do you have to be exclusive right away? But if you're seeing each other a couple months, 3 months, and it's like there's no label, you have to have a conversation, and you have to be very direct. And so many women in particular we've been so conditioned to lean back, to not actually say what it is that we want, to make it so that the other person leads. Like, what are we? Like, never say, what are we? Say, this is what I want. I like you. I think you're great. I think we could build something great. What do you think? And if they are like, I'm not sure, even though it's been 3 months, we've hung out, like we're hanging out every day, I'm not sure, get out. But what a lot of people say is like, okay, well, yeah, okay. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I feel like that it's just such a real scenario. I mean, do you feel like if you're, and then there's some people, I don't know, if you're on a first date, is it bad to set the expectations of like, oh, I'm in a place where I'm looking to meet somebody and get married eventually? And
absolutely, say it straight away. So
is there ever a point where you feel like setting expectations is overbearing or like too much?
No, I think it's I think you have to be honest about what it is that you want.
Yeah.
Like I'm in this right now and out there because I want to meet someone who I can spend my life with.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for casual.
That's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the last thing, breakups, these can feel particularly devastating. And so a lot of people who might be listening or even read your book are going through a breakup. And you wrote, I think everyone knows how messy our minds are when we go through a breakup. We are questioning everything. If we believe in God, we're questioning God's existence. We're questioning our ability to survive. We're playing certain conversations over and over and over in our heads. We feel like we have no control over our minds. They become totally obsessive. Mm-hmm. And we are questioning our decision, our behavior, and our worth. And so any words on like, how do you actually get through this period?
Yeah. So one thing that I think is useful for people to hear is that these particularly devastating breakups, you will go through temporary insanity. That's really what's happening. You feel insane. That's correct. You are going through a temporary insanity. Your mind becomes a complete battlefield, like you said, like you read, questioning everything. And I think that actually gives people a little bit of comfort to know that what you're going through is actually part of the process. And that if you feel insane, yes, that's chemically what's going on. The withdrawal from the person with whom you've synchronized your nervous system with is no longer in your life, or the person who, a lot of times we think that the breakup is about the person, but the really catastrophic breakups, the ones that really bring us to our knees, they're unearthing old pain. Mm-hmm. It's like mommy didn't love me, daddy didn't love me, or my breakup last year or 2 years ago, or I'm, that thing that I always felt inadequate about is really coming to the surface. Yeah. Like it's true. I am inadequate. And we're also strongly mourning the dream of what it could have been. And then we feel like failures, and we feel like victims, and we feel like villains. And so there's so much going on that actually it's bigger than the person that you're mourning. Or who you're mourning. And so what I would say as advice is understand it's not permanent. And that this just happened, you can't see clearly right now. So whatever stories you're coming up with, whatever conclusions you're coming up with, you're right in the thick of like, this just happened. You don't even have you don't know what's going on. You don't have perspective. You need to process your feelings. And you can do that with a therapist, or you can do that with a mentor or coach or a friend, meaning you have to be like, okay, I feel this. What am I feeling underneath this? And what am I feeling underneath that? It's like, oh, I'm really angry. Okay, well, What are you angry about? I'm angry that they blah, blah, blah. Well, what is it about that? Well, I just feel really disappointed. Okay. So now we're going a layer deeper from the anger. This is how you process feelings. You go from the anger, I feel really disappointed. Okay. Why are you so disappointed? Well, because, they said that they would love me forever. Okay. So how does that make you feel? Well, I feel really hurt. I feel really abandoned. Right. And so then you're starting to really go through it. And that's when you can start to let go of the feelings. And that's what it means to process your grief, the anger, the despair, the depression, the frustration, all of it. That's how you process. So you have to do that, and you got to lean on your loved ones, because you're going to feel totally unlovable. You're going to feel not enough. There's never a time where people feel so not good enough than when they're going through a breakup, even if they were the one who initiated it. And so you have to be around the people who remind you, who see you, who know you, who can put the mirror up and reflect back to you who you really are, who they see you as, so that your self-esteem can stay intact. And then you have to take care of yourself, move your body, take it one day at a time, 1 hour at a time. And
That's so good.
Yeah.
Well, this was just like a masterclass in relationships. It was amazing. And I think people are just going to get so much out of it. We'll put the link to the book in the description. And just thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yeah.